Welcome, and thank you for your interest in WebQuery from Informediate. In today's session, I'd like to focus specifically on our Comparative Time Reports option. To begin, I'll just click on Comparative Time Reports. One of the things that makes WebQuery especially attractive to most of our customers and prospects is the fact that we've pre-configured data sets for many of the most popular distribution platforms. So data sets are basically a data connection to the underlying tables of whatever distribution platform you're running. So by us offering these pre-configurations, you and your people don't have to deal with the technical layers and SQL programming and so forth that's required by so many systems to interact with the data. So we've predefined these in various data sets, and you can control access to those data sets by users and groups. Now in this case, I'd like to begin with the sales data set. But again, to the concept of users and groups, many of our customers might limit their individual employees to specific data sets that are related to them. So in this particular example, this sales rep 1256 is a data set that's specific to only those transactions that rep number 1256 has been associated with. So if that particular rep logs into WebQuery, there's a real good chance that that's the only data set that that rep will be permitted to use. Now in our case, let's go with the general sales data set, which would include all the transactions across the whole corporation through this point in time. I'll hit the next button to begin, and you're presented with 5 black buttons representing the options that allow you to personalize this report to the situation and task at hand. The first button talks about changing fields. In the case of this company, which is an actual distribution company, they like to primarily look at sales, gross margin from commission cost, gross margin percent, and they like to start by evaluating their branches. So we can set preference here based on your company's default. Now what you see there corresponds to what you see a little lower under the report fields column. Again, you see branch sales, gross margin from commission cost, and gross margin percent. On the left side of the screen, you have numerous other available fields so that anytime you want, you can include those details into your report. So in this case, let's say that we want to add customer ID to the report. The sales data set originates at the line item level of detail. So in fact, if desired, we could see every line item that's been sold on every transaction that's flowed through your enterprise system. So even though we can get right down to all the details of all the transactions and line items that have flowed through sales, most of the time, most people don't want to look at any more detail than they need to. So one of the cool features of WebQuery is that it's going to automatically roll up and summarize at whatever level of detail that you've asked for. Now in this example, customer ID is the most unique field on the report. When we run this, we're going to get 1 row per customer. Or if we have the same customers in different branches, we're going to get 1 row per customer branch combination. We can run with that the way it is and or add more columns and so forth. Now in this particular case, sales, gross margin, and gross margin percent are going to be totaled and calculated by the customer. For the sake of example, you can add as many other fields as you'd like, going right down to item ID, descriptions. We can choose details related to order numbers, order dates, different pricing groups, quantities requested, who were the sales reps either at the time of the order or on the bill to or on the ship to, various ship to information, and so forth. So actually in this first case, I'm going to get rid of the customer ID and just leave this at the branch level for now. As I hit the next button, I'll be prepared to move on to the next question. The second question on this report regarding to changing time is what makes the comparative time module so unique and powerful. And that is, it has the ability to compare 1 or more time slices simultaneously on the same report. This company's preference was year-to-date last year to year-to-date this year on a calendar basis through yesterday. we have the option to work regular calendar year or a fiscal calendar year depending on the choice of your company. And we can typically map in just about any fiscal calendar that can be conceived. It's also possible to run time frames from both regular calendar years and fiscal years side by side if desired. So if you'd like to keep that selection, fine, you don't need to do anything. If you'd like to change or remove it, you can do those by clicking on the black button, or we can add to that time selection just by clicking on the drop-down list of the time periods to add. And what you'll see in that drop-down list is a very extensive list of predefined time comparisons. And these can be any combination of days, weeks, months, quarters, or years, again on either the fiscal or the regular calendar. So let's say, for example, that I'd like, in addition to our year-to-date comparison, let's say that I'd like to compare the last quarter last year to this year. So I'll choose that selection and I'll add it. And maybe on the same report, I'd like to look at the month to date this year to last year. So I'll scroll down in the month section and you can see we offer all sorts of different monthly comparisons. Month this year versus last year, fiscal month 1 to 2, and so forth. All kinds of options, just about anything that you can conceive of. You might want to compare the last 12 months versus the prior, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. And the beauty in all of these is that these are soft configured rather than hard coded. So if you can think of a time comparison that would be valuable to your company, most of the time we can adapt and configure that time period in a matter of minutes. So as long as it fits in the days, weeks, months, quarters, years themes, we should be able to handle your request. Now in this case, I'm just going to choose month to date this year versus last year and add that as well. So now I've got these 3 time comparisons: calendar year to dates, quarter to dates, and month to dates this year versus last year. All of those are what I would call relative times or dynamic times, in the sense that if I save them on the report, or if I schedule this report to run, the time selections will automatically be self-adjusting. I never have to change those parameters again. They're just going to adjust as the clock turns. Now sometimes you might want to use explicit time comparisons, and we have a few of those options as well. So maybe I want to choose an explicit date range, and I can either use the calendar picker or I can just type in the values however I please. That would be explicit in the sense that you're choosing actual explicit values and they'll remain that way until you specifically change them again. So they don't work as well on scheduled reports, but they're absolutely fine for ad hoc reports. Aside from comparing dates and date ranges, you can also compare month and month ranges, quarters, and years. So a lot of flexibility there in terms of the time and in terms of the type of time comparisons you might want to use. A couple more quick things to point out about time comparisons. In this particular report, we use invoice date as the default to drive the time comparisons, but you could just as easily click on any of these other date columns within the sales data set and you can use any of them to drive the time comparison. So I'm going to stick with invoice date for now. And aside from choosing the date, we're going to automatically show each time period, the difference in dollars, the difference in percent, and there are a few formatting options. You can turn those things on and off as desired at report creation time. The only other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to cancel that explicit date range comparison down below. So I'll cancel that last one, and we'll keep our year-to-date, quarterly, and month-to-date comparisons. So far, I've only answered 2 of the 5 questions or options related to reports, and many times that might be as far as I need to go. So shortly we'll talk about how to use filters to limit the specific scope or criteria that you want to narrow the results. We'll talk about changing sort orders. We'll talk about totals and subtotals and some other formatting options. But if I don't really want to deal with that, I can just run with the defaults. Now when I'm ready to run the report, I have a few options as well. On the left here, under Run Online, the first option is to run it and get all the results right back here on the web page. Or it's also very popular that some of our customers would like to save the results in a spreadsheet format and then manipulate them with Excel or some other tool. So if you're not familiar with the term CSV, it stands for comma separated values. It comes in a text format, and just about anything can read a CSV. Other times people would like to write a report that can't be changed. So the PDF option is also very popular. It does a great job of automatically sizing the report to be one page wide, some great built-in formatting. You can include cover pages, personalized logos, footers, and things of that sort. So we'll touch on that as well. This first time, let's just run it online and get the results back in the web page. Now, as I press that Run Online button, what's happening is it's looking at how I answered the questions above, and it's basically parsing that into a SQL statement, which would go live against your transaction processing system. Or in some cases, some companies would prefer that we create a data warehouse and query against that. So in this case, it is going live against the transaction processing system, so these numbers would be real-time up to that moment. And again, we ask for sales dollars, gross margin from commission cost, gross margin percent by branch. And the first set of numbers are the year-to-date comparisons, the next set the quarterly comparison, and then the monthly comparison on the right. Of course, down on the bottom, it's easy to see the grand totals in gray. And what's interesting to me is sales were up slightly overall, but they were actually up really big in the first branch, pretty good in the bottom branch, and there was significant shrink in that middle branch. So very mixed results, and if I were on this team, I would be especially curious at what happened in this branch 110 to account for that 20% decline. So as I mentioned, in this case we're using gross margin commission cost as one of the measurements. Now we can calculate gross margin using any of the costing methods available in your enterprise system, and we can change, or we call it alias, the names of the columns to be more indicative of what they are, as opposed to maybe the more cryptic column names used in the transaction system. So in other words, we can name things to make them easy and obvious for you and your team. Now, whenever you've got a report that it looks like that it might be something that you'd like to use again or share with others, all you need to do is give it a name. So in this case, we might call this branches. So I'll type that in and I'll press the save button. It tells me I already have one and asks me if I'd like to overwrite it. Sure, that's not a problem. So by saving the report, I didn't just save the data associated with. More importantly, I save those report parameters that I can then reuse and or schedule to automatically run reports anytime I'd like. So if I want to see that report again, I'll go up to my saved reports section, and there the third row is a branches report. Now it tells me, in fact, that it looks like I first created this report way back in 2007. I ran it in December and I modified it a moment ago. It looks like I've run it about 150 times since we last reset the counters. And if I want, I can add comments to remind me of what was the purpose of the report and so forth. We could use any of those criteria to search on the top. So you could sort by when they were created, when were they last run, when were they last modified, and so forth. Now, one of the other things that we can see about our branches report is in this second column under schedule, it kind of looks like a calendar icon, or at least that's what it's supposed to look like. So if we click on that, what that tells me is this report's already been scheduled to run. And in this case, it was last defined to run every Monday at 6 a.m. Now, you can run reports as often as every day, first, last day of the month, every day on a given day of the week, a specific day of the month, or maybe a less frequent schedule, maybe every month on the second Friday if you wish. We can open this up so it's configurable by time. So you can have specific reports going to specific users at different times of the day. Let's say I'm an early bird and I want that to be run at 5 a.m. Now, aside from the frequency, you can also choose how do you want us to format and deliver the report. So you can have passive reports that don't send notification, they just run and save the results, and then when your users want, they log in, click on the results button, and all the results will be sitting there waiting for them. And then in that case, they could just open up their results, and it only takes a moment to load the pages accordingly. Or I can back out to where I was, and a lot of people like this function that I can retrace my steps very easily just by using the back button. So probably the most popular option is to send the reports as a PDF file to a group of people. So let's go with that for now. In this case, I've got a collection of groups and individual users that I chose to send the report to. And notice that some of them have a user filter defined and the apply button turned on. So the way this works is if for members of the all group or the sales manager, they would get that report exactly the way we saw it a moment ago with exactly the same numbers. But if we were any of these individual reps, they would get the same format and layout, but the numbers would only reflect the activity that they were specifically associated with. More accurately, they would be limited to what rows qualified based on the user filters that are defined. For user filters, you can define one or more user filters for every data set. Different users can have different filters, and you can then use this kind of functionality to take one report, one schedule, and have it run as many different subsets as you would like, and have them automatically distribute those subsets to the different people depending on their email addresses that have been associated with their user IDs. So in this example, it's an easy way to take one report, share it with various members of the sales team, each limited to their own results. Many of our customers will use this even to automate reports back to their suppliers, maybe a past due open order report, or even their customers. It's very easy to tailor the content. Again, schedule a report, set up a distribution list, decide who you want to share it with, and limit the results to only what you want them to see. There's a quick option here that's kind of like the opposite of a blind copy. If you turn it on, all of the recipients will see who else is getting the report. They won't get their content, but they will see that other people on the distribution list. By default, that's off. And if you'd like to add some sort of text message, you can, maybe calling their attention to something specific. When I press OK, it's added to the schedule. And then in this case, we had it second Friday of every month. Maybe I changed my mind and maybe we'd like this to go out every day instead. If you'd like, we can even black out time slots for system maintenance or peak activity or whatever you'd like. I'll say OK, and that report will continue to run daily then until I explicitly delete it or change the schedule or so forth. So to summarize, not only is it very simple to create reports for non-technical users, but those reports can be easily saved, scheduled, shared with other users, and so forth, while also limiting the results based on the people that you're sharing it with and the things that you only want them to see. Let's bring that report back one more time and run it one more time quickly. And once again, what I noticed was that one location, 110, is down 26%. So let's say we want to act on that. One of the easiest ways to act on it would be to use filters. So in this case, we might filter by branch ID 110. So I'll click on that button, and we can filter on any combination of columns in the report. In this case specifically, we're going to use branch ID is 110. So very straightforward and easy to do that. In this case, we used the is condition and just had a simple text box for you to type in the value. In other cases, perhaps you might want to look at something part of a longer list, let's say maybe product group descriptions, where you could have hundreds or possibly thousands. So again, I'll use the is, but now I've got a drop-down box that automatically extracted the product groups or whatever other key criteria that you'd like to use. So once again, these are the kind of things that are easily configured by us in minutes that allow us to kind of tailor this to your preferences. The other thing worth pointing out is in our examples we've used is, but we have all kinds of other conditional operators. Is between, starts with, is one of, and the other thing I like to point out is you have all the nots. And sometimes the nots, not one of these, or not in this group, or not something specifically, sometimes those are very valuable to exclude rule breakers or perhaps erroneous data that you need to ignore to get to the truth for one reason or another. So those are all there for you as needed, and really helps make this versatile and to make sure that you get the accurate results based on a single version of the truth. Now I'm actually going to delete that product group description and just keep the branch ID filter. So if I'm filtering by branch, if it were me, probably what I would want to look at is the sales team first, to see if we've got one or two reps off to a bad start, or is there a problem that's more pervasive across the team. So I can scroll down to the sales rep section, and I can either choose the rep associated with the transaction, or the rep currently assigned to the customer, or again, if I want, I can use the rep on the bill to, the ship to, whatever. So in the case of comparative time reports, I like to use the reps currently assigned to the customer. That way, if territories have been changed, I'm going to see whether that customer's growing its business or not, regardless of who was the rep at the time. And again, I'm going to use their ID instead of their name here, just to protect the confidentiality of the data. So we're going to go by sales rep ID in this case, and I'll hit the next button. And the other thing I want to do here is I happen to know that this company has many sales reps, so I'd like to change the sort. So instead of sorting this alphabetically or numerically by branch and sales rep, it would be more meaningful to me if we could automatically sort this based on the change of sales or gross margin dollars. So I'm going to choose sorted by the change in gross margin dollars. Now I say the change. In this next column, you can choose any individual time slices that came out of these various time comparisons. So the first one's year to date last year, then year to date this year, then the difference in dollars and the difference in percent, and so forth for quarters and months. In my case, it would be preferable to do this on the difference of the year to date comparison. And since I'm looking for trouble here and trying to find out what that shrink was about, I might change the sort order and say show me the biggest losers first. And if I want, I can limit the results, maybe top 10, top 100, whatever, or in this case I'll simply take them all. So let's run this again, and we get those results back very quickly. Unfortunately, what we see here are a lot of red numbers, and even more unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's limited to one or two reps. So as I scroll down the page, again, these are sorted on the change in gross margin dollars descending. So if I go all the way to the other end, we'll be on the opposite end of the sort. And if there were any big winners in gross margin dollar change, they'd be down here. And I do see some impressive percentages. Now, part of this is due, if you look back to the prior year's numbers, you get some pretty low numbers here. So these look like probably some new reps that are just getting up to speed. But unfortunately, as the bottom line indicates, there isn't enough there to offset those reps that had a shrinking business. So let's go back to the top for a minute here, and just glancing down the difference pages, if I look at these top three reps combined, I see over 800,000 in lost sales and over $250,000 in lost margin. So that's pretty painful just for those three. I could isolate these reps individually or collectively. So let's just say we want to look at those three reps together, 1202, 1280, and 1255. So we can use the filters scenario to do that. So we're going to filter, in this case again, by sales rep ID currently assigned to the customer. And I'll use is one of as the conditional operator because I've got multiple values to consider. 1280 and 1255. And I'll hit the next button. So we've got all three of those reps locked in. Now I'm going to leave the same filter on the board, but instead of doing this by rep, I would be much more interested in doing it at the customer level now. So I'll scroll down, grab the customer ID. So now we're going to break down the sales and margin by customer. We don't need branch anymore because we're locked in the 110. But I would like to leave the sales rep on there so I can see which customer is associated with which rep. Let's go ahead and run this. And impressively, we get the results back almost immediately. Now again, we've used the same sort here, which is change in gross margin dollars descending. So unfortunately, this first customer is off almost $250,000 in sales, almost $80,000 in margin, and that's a 94% change. Very alarming. I see the second customer is off 100%. Now sometimes when a customer is off 100%, that may be due to factors out of this distributor's control. Maybe the customer's got liquidity problems, credit problems, and so forth. But whenever I see something minus 90 some percent, I have to wonder how that happens in reality. I would be motivated based on what we see here to take a look at this particular customer to see if we can find out more specific information about why their buying pattern changed so dramatically. So I'll just copy that customer ID, change the filter, add the filter for that particular customer. So now that we're going to isolate that customer, we could still break this down any number of ways, by vendor, by product group, but let's just cut to the chase and find out exactly what items they've bought in the past. We want to scroll down and then I'll select items and descriptions. And so far all we've looked at is sales and gross margin dollars for metrics. We're certainly not limited to that. And now that we're going to get down to the item details, it may be a great time to start to look at units ordered, requested, and shipped. And one of the other things I'd like to point out real quickly is we're not limited to only the columns and the data available in your ERP. Sometimes we can calculate columns rather easily based on other metrics. So fill rate's a good example of that, where fill rate is simply the quantity shipped divided by quantity requested. And if I want, I can reorder columns as I'd like to here. Now, in this case, I no longer need the sales rep or the customer ID because we've honed in on a very specific customer here. And I can again move these columns around to be the way I want to see them. So I'll do that. And let's run this again. I've still got the same sort in play where it's changing gross margin dollars descending. So let's go ahead and run this one more time. What we get back here is a complete listing of all the items they've previously purchased and any of these qualifying time comparisons. And again, they're still sorted on the change in gross margin dollar descending. I won't bore you with all the individual lines here, other than to suggest that there's literally hundreds, if not 1,000 different line items that they previously purchased. If we do go down to the very end though, we can see again the summary of that, the 94% shrink. Now one of the things that I find really interesting about these results is notice down here near the bottom at the opposite end of the sort, we're actually seeing some black 100%. In other words, this customer has now started buying products from this distributor they never bought before, even in the current month. So what that tends to indicate is that the customer is still liquid, still has a decent credit rating, and apparently this distributor has not alienated them completely, otherwise they wouldn't be buying these products. What it may suggest is that this distributor now has a competitor and this customer might just be cherry picking best prices. And those would be the kind of things that would deserve a little bit of investigation. If it were me, I would probably save this report, schedule it, maybe run it once a month, send it to the sales rep, copy the sales manager, maybe anybody involved in fulfillment, and then so now we've established accountability and follow through. So once a month I might glance at this to see if this rep or the people involved are making progress or whether there's something else that needs to be done. Now this is a pretty long and wide report as I scroll back up to the top here. So far we've used the Run Online Results option all the way through, but you can begin to see that if I've got a really long report and wide report, this may not be the best viewing option. In fact, whether I want to save it or not, if I've got a long and wide report, I like to use the PDF option instead. So let's take a quick look at how that would work. And also notice that most of my width of my screen is being fully used here just to render this information. But to make this more challenging, let's just add another time slice to this. Maybe I want to compare yesterday versus the day before. So in essence, that adds 4 new columns with the difference calculations built in. So let's run this one more time, in this case as a PDF, and you'll see the differences of the way this is produced and rendered. So in this case, I'm going to open it with, I use the Foxit reader. So by running to a PDF, one of the nice options, if desired, is we'll give you a cover page, which will summarize any selection criteria, sorts, and so forth that you had indicated. Now, if you'd like, we can drop your logo up here in the top of the page, put a footer on it with any sort of confidentiality notices or other things that you'd like to share. So the cover page itself is nice, and then notice as we scroll down to the first page, even with the extra columns of the day versus the previous, this all fits very neatly and nicely one page wide. If we look towards the bottom here, we can now see we're on page 2 of 37. So everything's been automatically laid out. You've got headers and framing on the pages, and everything's automatically laid out for you. Now, in this case, I've got a nice wide monitor, so this is very easy for me to see. But with the built-in PDF tools, I can zoom in this and zoom out of this as required to focus on something specific. I can also take advantage of some of the other built-in PDF functionality to add notes, highlight text, set bookmarks, share the project, print it, search it. So all kinds of great features free as part of the PDF functionality itself. The other option that we mentioned is the spreadsheet option, or specifically it's called download to CSV. Now it works the same way. It takes slightly longer to run these because first we have to retrieve the data, then we have to re-render it in the spreadsheet format. In my case, like most systems, CSVs will automatically be opened by Excel. And now we've got the spreadsheet. If I click that top left corner and then between A and B, all the columns will be sized automatically based on the content width. And then I've got all my specific columns that came out of all those different sales comparisons. And notice this is slightly different in as much as I now have one row per item, and of course I get any number of time comparisons left to right. Real quick feature that some people aren't familiar with. Let's say I want to chart those top selling units. What I do is drag a range of cells and then hit the F11 key. Excel will instantly turn that into a chart for me. And of course it provides all sorts of options for you to manipulate that chart, but really a very easy way to extract data, take a subset, turn it into a chart, play what if games and so forth. So those are all available out of the CSV option. Now in this particular case, we've kind of took a long storytelling approach where what I wanted to show you is strategically, without knowing much about this company, we were able to quickly evaluate their branches, find underperforming sales reps, find what customers lost the most business with those reps, and then cut right down to the chase to find out how a customer's buying pattern had changed. We certainly don't have to go through all those steps. In fact, there's numerous reports predefined and delivered out of the box. So, for example, one of those would be customer gross margin shrink. I could run this report and just automatically see the top 100 customers that had margin shrink over any of the time comparisons available. So you can cut through this just about any way you want, again in really seconds to minutes, whether it's customer, suppliers, sales rep, product group, or any combination of those or any criteria. It should really only take a few seconds to a few minutes to set up these reports, save them, schedule them, share them with other people as desired, limit results as needed, establish accountability by scheduling and delivering to people at set intervals, and in essence finding out what or who is hot or not in your organization over various time frames with minimal interaction. So those are just some of the many reasons why our customers love WebQuery and our comparative time module. I guess in closing, today we talked a lot about the sales data set, but indeed you can use the same comparative time functions to look at things like bookings, which would be orders, invoice combined, receipts, purchase orders, production orders, revenue and expense, profit and loss analysis, and so forth. So lots of different ways to exploit the comparative time function in the various data sets that you might be interested in looking at in your company. We'd love to hear from you. We thank you for your interest. Please contact us at info@informediate.com. Thanks again for your time, and we look forward to speaking with you again. Have a great day.